Why hello there. My name is Jawan Murphy, and I'm making this video because I have to do a project in in English, like my survival of fittest English class, and I have to record a video on what I did, on what I typed on my expert project, step four. So I decided to make a video because he told us to make a video of what we're an expert at, but. What I really wanted to talk about on my expert project is like, can things in reality ever be independent, or are things within reality dependent within certain worldviews? You know what I'm saying? So, like in an atheist worldview, like or like they'll, atheists, they have a lack of belief in a creator, meaning that they don't believe in like a creator that started these chains of events or anything like that, yada yada yada. Like, you'll see a naturalist atheist, they'll just say that like this creator, or no, the creator is like the natural things, like, natural things inside our reality is what creates. There's no creator at all. So anything that's not natural, or is in the physical reality of by which the laws of physics operate, then it is not real. But when we look at theists such as myself, we tend to say that there is a God, and there is a rational mind that is necessary for other rational things to exist. Any other objections against this would lead to an infinite regress, but we have to dig deeper into this stuff to kind of understand the deeper things about these type of things. So what I'm going to start off with, I'm going to start off with potentiality and actuality, because potentiality and actuality is the thing that you need to understand in order to understand these type of things when theists and atheists come into discussion or debates when it comes to this stuff like this. So potentiality and actuality, they come from Aristotle, and over time, he got so popular that his metaphysics was named Aristotelian metaphysics. I don't know if I pronounced that right, but um, Aristotle's metaphysics, it's very important in metaphysics to understand how contingent things or contingent properties within reality, aka the universe, operate, right? And when I'm saying this, I'm talking about the cosmological argument. Cosmological argument is like some argument that describes existence itself, why things exist, and all that stuff, and it goes in depth using Aristotelian metaphysics. I mean, you can use potentiality and actuality in Aristotle's metaphysics, but no, no, no. Ah, my bad, my bad. You can use potentiality and actuality to go deeper into the cosmological argument. But for me, I've never really seen somebody use it. But let's just go in potentiality and actuality. So let's just say potentiality and actuality, it can be used for many things, especially the cosmological argument and infinite gress, plus general relativity, that the very popular um thing that Albert Einstein, the great physician, proposed. Um yeah, it's a very good thing. It's a very popular thing, and it's very important to understand. However, let's define potentiality and actuality. Potentiality and actuality are Aristotelian philosophical concepts explaining chain, motion, and purpose. Potentiality, it's the innate capacity or possibility for a thing to become something else. Example: a seed. A seed, it's potential, right? But it has the potential to be something else. You get what I mean? But change is the process of actualizing a potential. Potentiality is the inherent capacity to change, act, or be acted upon. It is considered the substrate of change, which is often associated with matter like raw clay. Now we go to actuality. Actuality is the fulfillment of a potential thing. It represents the end, goal, or form of a thing. It is the state of being fully realized or being fully complete. And remember when I gave you the example of my the seed example, the seed analogy. You know, a seed has the potentiality to become a tree, but the grown tree is the actualized state of that potential. Another example is a raw marble has the potentiality to be a statue. The finished sculpted artwork is the actuality. The ability to learn a language is a potential. Speaking it, however, is the actuality. Or you could use biological analogies like a fetus within the womb has the potential to become a baby and is able to breathe and eat on its own. The actualized state is when it does become a baby and is able to do those things. So in a sense, potentiality becomes actuality when specific conditions are met. Like you can hear, fight, action, you know what I mean? You have the potential to do all those things, right? But it doesn't really become a thing until you do it, which is the actualization of that process. Aristotle he argued that actuality is prior to potentiality in formula, time, and substance, as everything that changes must be changed by something that is already actual. The movement from potentiality to actuality is a purposefully driven by internal and or form ontologically. Ontological or ontology itself, it is the study of what is, like the nature of being itself, you know what I mean? So now this is now potentiality and actuality is heavily used in the cosmology argument. Like I use potentiality and actuality for something else before using the cosmology argument to argue that there must be a god. But the cosmology argument doesn't merely prove a first cause in a temporal sense. When we examine through the lens of act and potency, it reveals something far deeper. Contingent beings are composites of act and potency. It possesses actuality but also unrealized potential, and whatever is in potency cannot actualize itself. So think of it like this: when we look at reality and we look at how our reality is in motion or like just operates in general, we know that a baby can't live on its own unless it's actualized by another person. A baby is potent, right? A baby needs its parents that are already actualized, that already know things. This baby, it needs parents to become actualized. You know what I mean? To reach its fullest potential, right? So yeah, whatever is in potency cannot actualize itself. It requires something already actual to do so. What I gave you that example. If every being were only a mixture of act and potency, then all actuality would be derivative, which leads to an infinite regress of borrowed existence. That explains nothing unless there exists a being that is pure act, actus purus. Now, actus purus, or a being that is pure act, is what we describe God. God is this pure act being because he is the first. He is the first cause of this chain of existence that we have right now, or this creation in general. He is the uncreated being that contains no potency to act whatsoever. Pure act lacks this. This therefore, when we look at the cosmology argument, we know that that this pure act isn't a potent thing, but rather he is the first cause that is uncaused, meaning that I don't even think he's filled with any potentiality at all. So yeah, it this pure act it necessarily exists by its very essence, which is what modal logic uses. And I'll get into modal logic later on, but yeah, let's continue. Because time measures change and change requires potentiality, this being, which we call God, must also be internal, not merely old, but beyond the temporal axis. Now, the temporal axis, it's a thing that a lot of people use, but it's mostly used in physics. The temporal axis, it represents time as a dimension or a coordinate line, typical ordering events chronologically in physics. Physics, data analysis, and modeling. It serves as S or the. You know what I mean? It's like a dimension in space-time diagrams and in data visualization. When you look at a map, maps often change and move and have movement over time relative to spatial dimensions. But we don't care about the other ones. We only care about the physics one. You know what I'm saying? Because physics is what we're going to use. That's why I mentioned general relativity earlier on, because physics is the greatest thing ever. You know what I'm saying? Physics is the best thing, the thing that is used the most to understand how reality works. You know what I mean? So that's besides the point. I don't know why I went off topic, but in relativistic physics, the temporal axis represents a dimension in a 4D space-time manifold. It's often paired with spatial axes though observers in different frames may see different temporal components. It is the horizontal line on the graph which is mostly used in scientific fields to visualize change over time, such as spatial modeling and stuff. Like example, if you see a cube, it has like if you see a 3D space time cube, you know what I'm saying? That is like, you know what I mean? That is in a sense a temporal component. You know what I mean? Or a temporal axis. Who cares? Anyways, it is a spatial modeling system. However, unlike spatial axis, which usually allow bi-directional movement, the temporal axis is often characterized by a fixed rate and unidirectional flow. Back to the potentiality and actuality, since matter is composite, changeable, and filled with potentiality, this being, by which we call God, cannot be material. And because limitation implies restriction by something else, which would introduce potentiality, this being must be infinite in pure actuality. Furthermore, if there were two such infinite beings, they would have to differ. But difference entails limitation because when we look at modal logic, it's something that is necessary. It cannot be otherwise. But if it's different, then that means this thing is contingent and filled with potentiality, right? So if there's difference, that entails limitation. And limitation entails potentiality, which contradicts pure act, which is actus puros. I don't know how to say it, but I like the word. I like saying it like that. But yeah, therefore, this being he has to be one, not two, which is how we arrive not at a vague first cause, but at a single necessary, eternal, immaterial, infinite source of all actuality, which is what classical theism calls God. You know, a lot of atheists, they can't argue against this. They say that they, like the atheists that I've talked to, they've said that this being, I can concede, like I'll quote to you what an atheist has said. An atheist has said before when I talked to him about this, he said that I can agree to this, but this pure act being does not have to be God. It could be something else. But when we look at classical theism, we can see that this being that we call God is just it's just a label. God is just a label that we call this being. I mean, you can have your own, like you can have your own type of label that you call this being, but you're you're still collapsing into theism, right? Like you're literally conceding and holding to theistic beliefs, and you're not holding onto your atheistic beliefs anymore, right? So yeah, this is the cosmological argument. Yeah, this is the cosmological argument with potentiality and actuality, which it functions as a foundational stone in a larger bridge. This argument, what I said, it doesn't really like identify this being as Jesus Christ, right? Well, there's no way that this argument can prove Jesus Christ. I don't know if I could prove Jesus Christ through this, but what it does what it does establish and what it does prove is that there is a metaphysical ground upon which further philosophical and historical argument can lead to specific claims of the Christian God, the Christian revelation, through Aristotle's potentiality and actuality doctrine with the cosmology argument. Sorry I said that. I'm really sorry I said that. But now that you understand what potentiality and actuality is, um let's get on with the infinite regress, shall we? Now, the infinite regress is very important and is the very thing that we will be discussing, whether to see if a creator is truly sufficient for actuality and causation, or if an infinite regress can lead to a paradox for many beliefs, such as atheism, which is what the argument is for. The reason I wanted to use this because it goes in depth about reality itself. Like there's multiple infinite regresses. I forgot the names, but one of them it's called an epistemic infinite regress, right? Yeah, it's called an epistemic infinite regress where there's really no ground to law. There's really no ground to knowledge, right? There's supposed to be a ground to knowledge, but in a sense, there's no ground at all. So you're borrowing these. There's so many faculties in the mind that you have, but these faculties they're all contingent on each other, and they go on until infinity because there's really no ground to when each and every single one of these faculties in your brain um got this knowledge from, because that's what epistemology is all about, right? I'm pretty sure epistemology is about knowledge, what you know what I mean, what does it mean to know and all that stuff, you know what I mean. But we'll be talking about the infinite regress because it's actually very sufficient for this argument or what we're talking about here. So an infinite regress, it's a philosophical paradox where um when there's no ground, like if there's no creator to something, but that change just randomly exists, then it leads to certain problems, right? So let's say for example, like yeah, let's say for example, how you have let's just say you have a line of dominoes, right? You have a line of dominoes right here that are standing up by themselves. But when you analyze the dominoes, these dominoes they're knocking each other down, right? They're knocking each other down. And these dominoes, they've been doing this forever. There was never a time when these dominoes were knocked down. They have always been knocked down, right? Now, for this example, you would assume that somebody else knocked down these dominoes, right? Because in order for these dominoes to be knocked down, something has to push the first domino down so all the other dominoes can knock down. But no, when we look at the infinite regress doesn't propose somebody knocked it down because the infinite regress it doesn't have any type of person that knocked it down whatsoever. This thing, these dominoes, they've just been knocking down forever and ever, and ever, and ever, and ever. That's what infinity is, right? So That's the infinite regress, for example. And when we apply the infinite regress to reality, we realize that, wow, this is literally impossible. But yeah, that's the infinite regress, and the infinite regress has been used in the cosmology argument, as you just heard me argue for God when I was, explaining potentiality and actuality, right? So, oh man, I'm tired. Sorry, but yeah, that's what the infinite regress is. The infinite regress is a philosophical paradox of where something just goes on until an infinite to infinity without any type of ground or justification of how that thing came into what it is. Because we know, because as you heard me explain, in my cosmological example, when I said that a baby needs its parents for it to grow and for it to survive. Like a baby, a baby cannot survive on its own. Of course, it needs its parents to survive. So a baby just can't um magically, like, it can't just magically like survive and grow on its own because it's dependent on its parents for it to survive. You know, and that's how I would agree, or I would argue that's how the theory of evolution works, right? Um, Survival of the fittest. These animals, they're dependent, and they need to survive. Like these animals, they need to survive, and they need to depend on each other for to survive and to eat, to reproduce. You know what I mean? Or else they'll go extinct. They'll be inferior. They won't adapt. They won't evolve. You know what I mean? This is something that my English teacher, his name is Mr. Broadbeck. We were watching a blog post or something on this biology teacher. I forgot his name, but um, Mr. Broadbeck definitely knows his name for sure. But um, yeah, he was talking about survival of the fittest and how animals reproduce and evolve and adapt to these certain conditions that they're in. Because if they don't survive and if they don't adapt, they'll get eaten. They'll go extinct, right? So yeah, everything in reality is dependent on something for its existence. And this thing cannot go on forever. Otherwise, it'll lead to an infinite regress, which is a very bad thing. It's impossible. It is not scientifically proven. It's incompatible with science for me. And I would say that not a very good thing. Not a very good thing to advocate for, because I'm not saying like it's a bad thing, but come on, like if you look at it, it's kind of stupid. It's very dumb actually. And I would use the infinite regress against like an atheist or an agnostic to argue that there must be a ground for creation and existence, which is what we call God, right? So yeah, but now we're gonna go on to general relativity. The greatest the greatest physicist ever. One of my favorite physicists, right? Because Einstein, he's just the greatest. He's the goat. I mean, what can you say? You can't say anything to that. He's just the greatest. He's the greatest mind ever. But if you've never heard of general relativity, then you'll hear it now because I'm about to explain it. Um, General relativity is a physics theory proposed by the popular physicist thinker known as Einstein, Albert Einstein, the greatest physicist ever. His theory, which is general relativity, provides a framework that suggests the universe had a beginning. Now, I know a bunch of people are going to cover my neck for saying this, but it's true. It's true. The universe had a beginning. And I love using general relativity because it helps my case so much. Because general relativity proposes that the universe is a contingent, actualized, possible world with potentiality. In modal metaphysics, aka modal logic, I don't know if anybody calls it modal metaphysics, but I call it that. We would say that the universe is a logical space or a modal universe. Excuse me. Um, General relativity will help me a lot in my explanation of infinite regress. But another thing that general relativity proposes so much that will help me a lot in this extra project is that space time began when the universe began during the Big Bang. That is the most important part of general relativity that I wanted to argue. Very important. Very important. It helps me because general relativity provides a scientific, like, it provides me scientific evidence that the universe had a definitive beginning rather than being eternal like other people propose. Like, um I've seen a lot of atheists, they like to use arguments saying that, like, if I like for example, if I say that God is the first cause and he is necessary for other things to exist, they'll be like, who created God? And that is the problem with the infinite regress right there. That is the problem with the infinite regress right there. I reply, if we don't have a first cause, then that will lead to an infinite regress, right? Um that'll lead to a serious infinite regress. But and then they'll position and say that, well, if God is the first cause, why does God have to be the first God? Why does God have to be eternal? Why can't the universe be eternal? And that is why we're using general relativity today, right? Because not only does it destroy that, not only does general relativity destroy that, general relativity provides scientific evidence that the universe had a definitive beginning rather than being eternal. Now, if something has a beginning, it cannot be eternal. It's impossible. Like, general relativity literally frames gravity as a geometric curvature of space-time. Like this literally allows scientists to trace the history of the universe backward to a singular dense origin and shows the universe has a temporal beginning. So when you use this against an atheist that believes in a, like, let's just say, like, a eternal universe, you can use general relativity against them in our current understanding of quantum physics, right? In quantum physics, space-time in theory emerges, and they're studying it. If space-time emerges, that means that it's not fundamental anymore like everybody has thought. Because if space-time emerges, that means that there's other quantum information that space-time relies on, meaning that space-time is dependent. So, you know, it's like, come on, man. Like, we winning, bro. We're winning, bro. We're winning. But I'm kind of getting off of topic right now, but let's get back to what we were talking about. But when we talk about general relativity and we talk about scientists, we can trace this expansion backward, which leads to the Big Bang or singularity. This literally proposes a finite timeline in the past when all matter, energy, space, and time were created. General relativity directly supports the premise that whatever begins to exist has a cause. which is something that the cosmology argument opposes because general relativity suggests the universe did in fact begin to exist. General relativity also claimed that time and space are not independent backgrounds that are inextricably connected and finite that warp and bend around mass. In the late 20th century and early 21st centuries, physicists like Roger Penrose, Stephen Hawking, Arvin Bourdais, and Adam Guth, Alexander Velikin, they developed space-time theorems from general relativity demonstrating that space-time themselves are finite created properties. Now, if space-time is created and finite, the causal agent, which is what we call God, is responsible for the universe. It's responsible for the universe, and this causal agent must exist outside of space-time because when we look at time, or when we look at time in general, we know that causation are not distinct because they happen both in time at the same time, right? So yeah, um, yeah, literally, like if you look at general relativity, again, I don't know why I keep saying this, but I'm gonna keep saying it. If you look at general relativity, it quite literally supports the idea of a transcendent creator. Um, like it literally does. Like if you use it in a theistic um perspective, um general relativity quite literally supports the idea of a transcendent creator. It supports the idea of a god or a creator. You know what I mean? But and I would love somebody to debunk this, right? Because general relativity, it's passed every single experiment test. Like we're talking about gravitational waves, bending of lives, and time dilation. These theorems and arguments such as cosmological argument and general relativity, which extremely criticize a lot of ideas that deny a first cause. I'm gonna well, okay. I'm gonna tell you a bunch of like ideologies and positions that deny a first cause or a temporal beginning or a foundational structure of reality, which we'll start off with Newtonian classical absolutism. Now, general relativity quite literally destroys this idea. It quite literally destroys the idea that space and time are absolute, mixed, and unchanging containers. Space time is dynamic and influenced by mass and energy. Steady state, steady state internal matter. Wait, what? Okay, my bad. But let's look at steady state internal matter since we now just clarified Newtonian classical absolutism. Now, when we look at steady state eternal matter, it establishes that space time is expanding or contradicting. Now, general relativity implies the universe is not static or infinitely old. It challenges the belief that it challenges the belief that matter has existed forever without a beginning. So it challenges these steady state internal matter and Newtonian classical absolutism, but Newtonian classical absolutism destroys. But it's been challenging steady state eternal matter. Now we're on to geometric determinism. Even though Einstein did believe in a deterministic universe, the mathematical necessity of singularities in general relativity points to areas where classical physics breaks down. Um, so this kind of like suggests that the universe has an edge or an origin, which again is often used against purely naturalistic models of an eternal past. Now we're on to atheism. Oh man. Now if you don't know what atheism is the opposite of theism. Theism is the belief in God. Now, atheism is the lack of belief in God. But in general, atheism is one of the most popular anti-theist positions in the world right now. Like, really popular, man. Really, really popular. But that's not the point. However, when we look at general relativity, because general relativity is used in some theological and philosophical arguments, like what I'm doing right now to challenge atheism, it primarily highlights the universe's need for a cause outside of space-time, even though general relativity is not really it's not a scientific, even though, yeah, like general relativity is a scientific theory, but it's not proof of God. It's not proof of God. The proponents argue its implications create difficulties for a strictly materialistic worldview, right? Because atheists don't believe in a foundation, right? I don't even like you can. I don't know if I'm strong any atheist, but in my experience, nah, atheists just don't believe in a foundation, which is a creator. So yeah. Now we're on to the eternal universe, which is what I was talking about earlier on when I was talking about my experience with atheists who use eternal universe. But if you don't know, well, I think I already clarified it, but let me clarify it again for those who don't know. Eternal universe is the belief that the universe in some form has always existed. It has always existed forever and did not begin at a specific moment. Now, when we look at Friedman Lee Maritre, I don't know how to say his name, but he has models, and you know what I mean. But when we look at his models and model cosmology, they demonstrate that the universe is expanding, and argue that space-time itself originated at a finite time in the past. Now, for general relativity, it suggests time is part of the physical universe. The beginning of the universe is the beginning of space-time itself. It's literally like if you like you get what I mean, right? The beginning of space-time or the beginning of the universe is the beginning of space-time. So if now we can argue that this quite literally removes the possibility of before. You know what I mean? Like it literally removes the possibility of before for a temporal cause to exist. This kind of forces a reconsideration of how the universe began, which is why which is why I really don't know why people use eternal universe so much. Like it just doesn't make sense at all with our current understanding of physics and philosophy, right? It just doesn't make sense at all. But we'll continue because people have their beliefs even though they're too silly and stupid. But let's go on ahead. Um and for the last one, we have strong naturalism and materialism. Strong naturalism holds that only nature exists and that the universe itself is self explanatory or eternal. I guess you could say it's just like another eternal universe, but general relativity challenges strong naturalism and materialism, which by doing so it undermines the notion that matter is a fundamental changeable substance of the universe. It replaces it with abstract geometry information and non-local structures instead of a universe made of solid stuff moving through empty space. General relativity prevents a reality where space time, energy, and geometry are inseparable and interconnected. They often behave more like an ideal, you know what I mean? Mathematical structures than a classical materialistic one. Now there's this equation that Einstein made. It's a very famous equation, and you've definitely heard this one before. It's E equals mc squared. That's energy equals mass. I'm pretty yeah, it's energy equals mass. But this equation, it's a dematerialization of matter, right? In materialism, it historically depends on the idea that matter, small, solid, tangible particles, constitutes the foundation, not the foundational, but in a sense, it kind of like materialism historically depends on the idea that matter constitutes the fundamental reality. Now, when we look at general relativity demonstrates that matter is simply a highly concentrated form of energy because matter can be created from energy and turned into energy. It cannot be the foundational substance of the universe. Now, you won't believe me when I say this, but materialists got cooked so bad by Einstein's theorem that they had to pivot to physicalism, where energy where energy fields are accepted. But guess what? General relativity still makes this problematic because the physical is no longer intuitive, solid stuff. When we look at Newton's mechanistic view, space was a passive container. Now, in general relativity, space is a dynamic, curved participant in physics, geometry. Since space time is geometry, and geometry is a branch of mathematics, which is abstract and logical, the foundational structure of the universe is mathematical rather than material. Gravity isn't a force moving through space, it's a structure of space itself changing. So, when we look at modern field theories developed partly from relativity, they show that space is never empty. It is a complex active quantum field. That's something that I'm going to talk about probably later in the summer because I'm just rushing through this project because I have to put it on my website and it's due very soon. But yeah, general relativity also supports a black universe view where time is a dimension rather than a passing moment. The past, present, and future are already there in a four-dimensional manifold, which challenges the materialist idea of material processes unfolding in a linear now. This quite literally creates a discrepancy between personal experience, which is the flow of time, and material reality, which material reality suggests a purely physical universe may not fully explain existence. Now, final one that we're going to do in general relativity, it's often impossible to locate gravitational energy in a specific place. While global conservation of energy might still hold, the inability to define localized energy disrupts classical materialism's need for local action, which is events happening because of local contact. All of these challenges have led some to argue that general relativity combined with quantum mechanics suggests that physical reality is not foundational, but it emerges from a more fundamental layer of information, mathematics, or relationality. This shift from matter to structure is considered by many to be a debunk of traditional strong materialism. So there you have it. This is why I love using general relativity so much because it's quite literally scientific evidence for God's existence or the creator's existence by which we call God, right? But now we have to explain the cosmology argument more because we literally have to explain modal logic, right? So let's explain um cosmology argument and Modal logic, because I literally haven't explained modal logic at all. If you saw my socks there, just ignore them. But well, as you heard with my general relativity explanation, we are now on the cosmology argument. Now, the cosmological argument is a philosophical argument for reality and a creator. It claims or asserts, still the same thing, but it asserts that because the universe exists and is contingent, it must have a necessary first cause or reason for its existence. It argues that an infinite regress of causes is impossible, meaning we must have a requirement of an uncaused causer or an unmoved mover. Now, there are thinkers like Thomas Aquinas. You've definitely heard of him some way somehow, but Thomas Aquinas. He's a popular Catholic theologian or Catholic metaphysician. Well, he's both because he's the goat. But guess what? I know nobody knows this, but Thomas Aquinas was so brilliant that Einstein's special relativity literally proved Thomas Aquinas' cosmology, bro. That is the insane part about it, and that is why, like, these guys are amazing, man. Like you can't deny it. They're just amazing. But anyways, let's get back on track because I have to finish this so I can finish my project. But there are thinkers like Thomas Aquinas who argue that everything in motion is moved by another, and a first unmoved mover must exist to start this chain. That is what Thomas Aquinas argued. That is one of his most famous arguments. Now, there's another argument from a philosopher known as Leibniz, who said because the universe could have failed to exist, it requires a necessary being as an explanation for its existence. Um, Notice how he said necessary. He said necessary, right? And I know it sounds like he's kind of like assuming it, but trust me, he's not assuming. He's literally not assuming, bro. He's not. But another one, another form of the cosmology argument, and it's probably the most popular one that a lot of people use, and it's from a person named Al Ghazali, and we call his cosmology argument the Kalam cosmological argument, which states that everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. Now we're getting onto modal logic. So there is another cosmological argument that exists, but it is entirely modal and uses modal logic, which makes it impossible for it to be criticized. Modal logic, man, I don't know, man. Like I used to not understand it, but now I understand how it works. But then again, it uses concepts like contingent beings, which are dependent and filled with potentiality, which is why you heard me talking about potentiality and actuality earlier on. But it also supposes that a being that exists but could have not existed, its existence depend on something else for existence in order for it to be actualized. Now we're getting to the good part of modal logic. Now, remember when I was talking about the necessary being and how these philosophers or thinkers keep like mentioning a necessary being? Well, we're going to define it. A necessary being or a necessary thing is a being or a thing that if it exists, it cannot exist. Like if something is necessary, it just it cannot exist. It cannot be otherwise. That's literally the definition of necessary itself, right? You would have to debunk this excuse me, sorry. But you will literally have to debunk this definition of necessary. When we look at reality, this is quite literally how necessary works, right? Because um let's just use for example I had to take my keystone exam, right? Because my keystone exam is necessary for me to graduate, and it cannot be otherwise either. Because if I don't pass this keystone exam, and if I don't do this keystone exam when it's necessary to graduate, I just won't graduate at all, right? So that is how necessary being works. A being or a thing that exists, it cannot exist. I don't know if the keystone is a necessary being, in a sense, because a keystone, like, it you don't have to do it. It can be otherwise, right? Because one of my friends, um they didn't have to do the keystone because they're under this one program called ACT or whatever. But you literally pass without having to do the keystone for graduation. But yeah, uh, it's a good analogy, so we'll just stick with it for now. But a necessary being's existence itself is self-explanatory or necessary for existence, right? This is what we call God, right? Um, God is necessary for creation to exist at all. That is how modal logic works with necessary being. But modal logic uses another concept known as possible worlds, which is a philosophical tool where a possible world is a complete, consistent description of how reality could have been. For example, in every possible world, 2 plus 2 equals 4 is a necessary truth, and it is quite literally true in all possible worlds. It cannot be otherwise. I'll give you another example. It is possible that in all possible worlds, a triangle has three angles and a square triangle is impossible. You get what I mean? But unlike contingent truths, mathematical truths such as 2 plus 2 equals 4 are deemed true regardless of how the universe is structured. Possible worlds are complete, consistent ways the world could have been in any scenario where logic and standard arithmetic hold. 2 plus 2 equals 4 remains constant and purely logical and cannot be altered at all. Now, this is what the cosmological argument is all about. It supposes all of these things, like the universe, is filled with contingent beings or motion. When we look at science, science presupposes foundational grounds for existence that are not themselves proven by scientific inquiry, but are required to make it possible. These foundational assumptions include that an objective reality exists, that it is intelligible or orderly, which is causation and contingency modal, logically speaking. Hey, was that tough? Was that hard? Probably was. But yeah. But the human mind can comprehend all of this, which is the crazy part. Science acts on the principle that the universe obeys laws that are constants, meaning that the same causes will produce the same effects regardless of time or place, even within science, which shows that science has some metaphysical grounds, whether some people don't like it, and they know who they are. A lot of atheists like to deny metaphysics, but metaphysics is important, guys. It is important for these things. Anyways, I can conclude with the reasoning and stuff that I gave you that things in reality cannot be independent. Things in reality are dependent, because if everything in reality was independent without a first cause, then that would lead to multiple problems, such as the infinite regress. You know what I mean? A contingent thing cannot be necessary because it's contingent and could have been otherwise. A fetus is contingent. It could have been otherwise. It could have been a fetus. It could have not been a fetus. It could have, like, it could have been in the womb. It couldn't have been in the womb. It's plain and simple. You know what I mean? So I can conclude things in reality cannot be independent. Rather, they are dependent on the actualized causes that came before them. But the creator is the cause of all these things, of all these contingent things in reality. Now there you have it. Oh man, that felt extremely long, bro. Excuse me, but anyways, I'm gonna end this video and probably probably a few months from now I'll probably make my own video. Very creative video on another argument that I made regarding hard determinism, and a lot of people that like to use hard determinism when it comes to God, when he says that if God is all powerful, all knowing, then free will can exist. Dumbass. But I'll make an argument on that. I'll make an argument on that. Well, I actually already made the argument, but I need to make a video on it first. So, I'll catch you guys. I don't know, a few years, a few months from now, and I'll think about it. Yeah. See ya. And you probably won't see me again because in a few days from now I literally graduate. So so it's right now it's May 13th, 2026, and prom is on Saturday. So Saturday I think that's May 22nd. I would assume it's May 22nd, but yeah, May 22nd I go to prom, and then after that I go to a Hershey Park trip, and then after that graduate out of high school, man. Graduate out of high school. But yeah, you'll probably never see me again. I'll probably hop on this YouTube account once in a while, probably. But yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I probably won't. You probably won't see me again unless this video does good. But to be honest, the way it is, I don't even think it's gonna be good at all. But we'll see. We'll see. Anyways, I'll stop talking. Thanks for watching this video, and bye. I hope you liked the argument. I really hope you liked um, the explanation of, can things in reality ever be independent, or are things within reality dependent within certain worldviews? Well, damn. I just said I was gonna go, but I have to answer this question. In certain worldviews, I would say that things in reality in like a theistic worldview are dependent. But when it comes to atheism or whatever, I believe that things in an atheistic worldview would be independent because they have a lack of belief in a creator. So there. Okay. I'm gone. I'm gone now. I'm done answering questions. Bye. See ya. See you guys.